Lowdown Happy Hour on Facebook Live. Thanks to everybody from all across the country and Interplanetary Galactica for joining us here this evening. We're going to talk about American politics in an age of Trumposity. Lily Tomlin said that no matter how cynical you get, it's almost impossible to keep up. And that's certainly true with the Trump White House. So tonight, to help us kind of figure out where we are and most importantly, where we're going, we've asked a friend of mine, and I think a friend of yours as well, Beto O'Rourke, to join us. Hello, Beto.
Good to see you, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to be with you. And where are you? In El Paso, I presume, and looks to be a bunch of books back there. What's going on?
Yeah, this is our home in Sunset Heights in El Paso. And this room that I'm in, I have been told, decent, that in 1912, General Pancho Villa met with the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General Hugh Scott, to see if they could iron out the differences between the Revolutionary Army that Villa was leading and the United States government. And in the short term, the meeting turned out okay. In the long term, Villa invaded the United States within about 6 months at Columbus, New Mexico. So there's some history.
Yeah, the negotiation didn't go that well, I presume.
No, not in the...
Right. And here we are again in revolutionary times, indeed. And again, we're in happy hour. I saw Beto just take a sip of something there. What do you got in your hand? What is that?
Jim, I'm drinking the Happy Camper IPA from Santa Fe Brewing. And
all right.
What are you drinking?
A great brewery. Well, I have something here. This is a draft beer from a brew pub here called the Austin Beer Garden and Brewery, ABGB. They call it ABGB. You got to say it fast, like heebie-jeebies.
And
so, yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they have a real attitude over there, but they're very worker friendly as well as beer friendly, and people friendly. So I go there quite a bit. It's a great joint. So here we are. We will enjoy our happy hour, but rather than just bemoan Donald Trump, plenty of people doing that. We want to talk about what are we going to do now. Here we are. We can't just accept the status quo. It seems to me that we, the people, are going to have to rise up, and you're doing that. Tell us the name of your new outfit that you brought together and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, happy to. So we started an organization at the end of last year called Powered by People that seeks to bring volunteers, everyday Texans from all 254 counties, into the most important elections in our state. And I think you'd probably agree with me. We have a historic opportunity to win the state house for the first time in 2 decades. We're 9 seats short. And I actually won more votes than Ted Cruz did in 9 of those districts currently represented by Republicans. So one could argue not only is it possible, in some ways we've done it before. And then I want to lay out this theory of the case to you, Jim, and get your feedback and see if I'm off base. I think that if this presidential election is close, and even if Joe Biden were to win not only the popular vote, but the electoral college vote, but the margin were slim enough to exploit, then I believe our current president, who respects no constitution or rule of law and will do anything to increase his purchase on power, will seek to create chaos and confusion over the result. He's already been warning the country about mail-in ballots and Democratic voter fraud. It's not beyond my imagination to see him ordering his attorney general to invalidate or contest the election results in some states and have that go to the Supreme Court. So into the breach appears the 38 electoral college votes of Texas. If Biden becomes the first Democrat, if Trump becomes the first Republican to lose Texas since 1976, I think that it seals the deal on the end of the Trump presidency, and it forever changes what is possible electorally speaking in the United States of America. So we, along with you and everyone who's working on this in Texas, want to make sure that we are ready for that outcome. The polls say that it's within the margin of error. We know that polls don't vote, and we can take no satisfaction in that.
Yes.
But it should give us some hope and some additional spur to try to get this done. So right now, Jim, it's phone calls. We've made more than 1 million phone calls to help register likely Democrats in Texas and to contact already registered Democrats and make sure they're committed to voting on November 3rd or by mail if they're eligible. And we've got millions to go over the next 4 months, and all that is being done by volunteers all over the state of Texas. So that's Powered by People.
Okay, that's the name of the organization, Powered by People. I want to get back to the voluntary effort that you're making in one particular aspect of it. But before we do, I want to go back to a number that you mentioned there. You said 9 votes, 9 House seats. We are within 9 seats in the Texas legislature, Texas House of Representatives, of having a Democratic majority. Those are winnable. We have targeted some 20 districts in Texas that were close last time, and we have very good candidates, and we've been working with those candidates and working, most importantly, with the grassroots folks in those districts to move those candidates forward. But if we win those, just those alone, that means that would be the legislature that would do the reapportioning in Texas. And I sit to you here in Austin, Texas, where we are divided into 6 different congressional districts, only one of which is actually in Austin. The rest go off to Houston, Fort Worth, San Antonio, et cetera. So this is gerrymandering at its very worst. This is a form of voter suppression. We've had voter suppression over the years. My first vote in 1964 was when the poll tax still existed. You had to pay to vote, and it mounted to about $25, $30 in today's money. That's real money for poor people in particular. And of course, it was intended to keep Black and Mexican American and poor people generally out of the polls, and it was very effective at doing that. That change alone in doing away with the poll tax was an enormous boost that allowed the possibility of civil rights legislation that came after that. The Civil Rights Acts, the Voting Rights Act, the Public Accommodations Act, et cetera, that extended democracy somewhat. We're still in that fight. But today, it's even worse. Gerrymandering is probably the least of it, weirdly, because of voter suppression. Voter ID, the requirement of voter ID. Talk a little bit about that, Beto. You've done such work. Of course, El Paso is a Latino center of the state of Texas, really as close with Mexico and in many ways more closer even than it is with the United States. In fact, El Paso is closer to 5 other state capitals than it is to Austin, 3 of which are in Mexico. So people of El Paso sometimes feel very left out. But sometimes they want to be left out from what goes on here in Austin. So talk a little bit about that, though, about voter suppression generally, but particularly about this voter ID thing that's been going on for several years.
Absolutely. So maybe begin with a little bit of additional El Paso history. There's a El Paso resident that we are very proud of here in this community. His name is Dr. Lawrence Nixon.
Yes.
And he was born in East Texas. But because he was Black, though he finished medical school, though he was an accomplished physician, was not allowed to practice medicine. So he moved to El Paso, the westernmost of our 254 counties, started the first chapter of the NAACP at the start of the 20th century in Texas, right here in El Paso. And then, Jim, as you know, in 1923, the state legislature passed a law that essentially comprised the all-white Democratic primary. So from 1924 to 1944, for 20 years, if you were Black or brown and in Texas, you could not, by law, cast a ballot in the all-important Democratic primary. Lawrence Nixon takes this case to the Supreme Court twice in order to be able to cast a ballot. Twice, took him 20 years, finally gets it done. But as you mentioned, he was then met with the poll tax. After the poll tax is abolished, you had the governor of Texas establish annual mandatory re-registration, seeking to exclude Black and Mexican American voters. And then you mentioned voter ID. When the Voting Rights Act is neutered by the Supreme Court, within minutes, the Texas Republican-controlled government implements the most onerous voter ID measure in the 50 United States, making it harder and harder because you've got racial gerrymandering, you've got decades of voter suppression. Now you have voter ID laws. It produced a state that was in 2018 50th in voter turnout in the United States, not by accident, not because love our democracy less than anyone else, but because it was designed and drawn that way. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of obstacles and barriers to transcend. And this work that we're doing now, while we still have to work within these barriers, is going to produce that majority that you just talked about, Jim, that will be able to draw inclusive boundaries, remove the voter ID laws so that more people can cast their ballots. And then wouldn't it be amazing if we had automatic voter registration for every 18-year-old in the state of Texas, every resident who moves here, everyone who becomes a citizen, and then same-day voter registration so that everyone can participate in our elections. I think that should be the goal.
Bingo. I'd go further. I'd say you're born, you're registered to vote right there.
I love it.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd and really infuriating that that a major political party, and well, really two, because it used to be the Democrats doing it, and now it's the Republicans doing it, try to prevent voting in a place that pretends to be a democracy. So that's the importance, it seems to me, of the effort that you're making with Powered by People. And I'm intrigued by one particular aspect of your work that seems pretty innovative, and that is to target people who have moved into Texas since the last election cycle, who might be inclined to be Democrats, but have not been registered so far. So that talk a little bit about that and how you're doing that outreach. How does it work?
So our understanding is that there are about 1.4 million known Democrats who have moved to Texas in the last 3 years and have yet to update their voter registration here. How do we know that? We looked at the U.S. Postal Service's change of address form database. So we know that they've moved to Texas. Then we looked at those new Texans' voter history in their former home state. And we can see that they reliably voted in the Democratic primary in Pennsylvania or Florida or New York or Idaho or wherever they came from before they reached Texas. But we also know from looking at the Secretary of State's database here in Texas that they have yet to update their voter registration in our state. So 1.4 million known previously voting Democrats who are here, we are mailing them a voter registration form that is pre-filled. All they've got to do is sign it and then put it in the self-addressed stamped envelope that we've included. But if that weren't enough, we're then also calling them to remind them. We say, hey, Jim, I know you get a bunch of mail, but we mailed you a voter registration form. Would you check that pile of mail, make sure you got it? Is the information correct? Wonderful. Sign that, put it in the mail, and you are good to go for the November 3rd election, the most important of our lifetime. So imagine if it'd be wonderful if we got all 1.4 million registered and to the poll. We'd win without a doubt. But even if we got half or a quarter or a fifth of them registered into the polls, we lost to Ted Cruz by under 2.6% in a midterm year. I really think this is ours as Democrats to lose in 2020, but we got to do the work. And so finding these newly moved Texans is part of that.
And work is what politics is all about, really. I mean, there's nothing magic about it. It's a grind. It can be embarrassing as one who is, elected by the people of Texas, much to their amusement, a couple of times. I know what it is to go around this huge state and try to say to people, I'm the one, But of course, it's not the one, and the candidates are the least important. And that's why I think the grassroots efforts that you are making, LULAC has come alive again, a long-time Latin American organization here in Texas, founded by veterans in several decades ago. New groups like JOLT, which are focusing on Latina millennials, even using quinceañeras, coming of age parties for 15-year-olds in that community, using that as a political organizing tool. And I'll diverge here a little bit, since we're having a happy hour, that, politics ought to be fun. And we ought to, culture is more important than any political speech you can give. And that's the other importance of what you're doing, I think, is you're getting family to family, neighbor to neighbor type of door-to-door organizing, and getting people who know each other, and that has the greatest credibility of any kind of political messaging that can be done. So speak just a little bit about that.
Absolutely, and that's what drew me to politics. And in fact, you and I have talked before. I remember you from coming to El Paso in the 1980s. No one came to El Paso, Texas. The hardest, or one of the hardest places in the state to get to. So when someone like you would show up here for us, we all took note, and we all had a really good time. It's about people being together, eyeball to eyeball, having a beer, or just enjoying one company. It's as old as democracy itself, and all the slick, overly produced, overly consulted stuff that you see today on TV and Facebook, that doesn't look like the politics that I loved growing up here in El Paso with. So we're trying to get back to that with Powered by People.
The fiesta feel of
That's right.
of political life. Deanna is indicating that we've got a bunch of calls coming in. People who want to talk to you and communicate some vision too. Before we jump to that, let me note that I knew Beto's father. His father was the county judge when I was running for political office here, and his father, Patrick O'Rourke, had a function in the courthouse for me, a political function. And as I walked into his office, he was talking to a local reporter, who was asking, "What in the world? How can you have a political function in a public office?" And Patrick O'Rourke said, "Because it's a public office."
I've got a picture of
I've got it.
Oh, you got it too.
Yeah, I'm going to throw it up. Yeah. Do you have it? Do you want to show it? You have the original. I'm sorry. I'm Deanna, the disembodied voice. Nobody else can see me but you guys.
Deanna, I will.
I can put it up on the screen. I have it as well. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. Here it is. Here's the picture that we're talking about. This is, you got Hightower and Beto's dad and a dude in a scarecrow costume.
It's the day after Halloween. It's November 1st, 1984. And they're, still celebrating, I guess, some of them. And here comes Hightower to El Paso, Texas on the eve of the election to get us fired up and excited and to have a good time and to make sure that there's a good, strong showing in a part of the state that was often left out and forgotten. And I've kept this photograph all these years, 36 years later, because it was such an important day for us here. So that's the kind of politics I hope we can get back to.
There you go. Right.
Amen.
So let's hear what some people are saying, Deanna.
Well, I got to tell you, every time we mention that it's about getting folks together and having a good time together, we get so many hearts, we get so many likes, we get so many, just people are so enthusiastic about this idea that it's about us meeting up with each other, and that it's about us being part of the actual things that are happening in the world. One question that we had was straight up is actually from Katie. Katie Hightower, our Katie, was saying, like, we assign people a social security number at birth. Like, why don't we include a voter registration with that? Is that something, like how are we thinking about changing these policies? And I also just want to say before I drop back out, just a lot of love for you both from a lot of people around the country. We've got Utah in the house. We've got Illinois in the house. Obviously, we've got Texas in the house. So a lot of love for y'all. But yeah, let's talk about how we're going to make this happen. What are the things that are actually working?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll set you up, Jim, because one of the things that I love listening to you talk about is the populist movement that was born in Lampasas, Texas, and then spread throughout the country and produced some of the things that we take for granted for today in 2020, the direct election of U.S. senators, the fact that women can vote, and so much of the progress on unions, standing up for farmers, the mom and pop shop against the big corporate interests or the public or the trusts at the time. And I sometimes think about that as a reaction to the Gilded Age and the concentration of power and wealth and privilege in the country. And we're at a similar point now where so much power, wealth, and privilege has been concentrated. And we're meeting such a dire health crisis and economic crisis. Twice as many Texans have filed for unemployment in the first 2 months of this pandemic as did in all of 2019. And I wonder, out of this awful crisis, which I hope that we are able to meet and to help people out who are suffering, we might not see some significant reforms and changes, whether it be in healthcare, whether it's a minimum wage that's still $7.25 an hour in Texas, which is, when you hear Dan Patrick saying there are more important things than living. Let's reopen the state. Who he's talking about dying is the $7.25 an hour person who chances are in Texas is Mexican American or African American. But I wanted to get your thoughts, Jim, on whether this moment might also afford us an opportunity to make some of these significant changes, including on voting rights.
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, people are on the move at a grassroots level, much to the amazement of the media establishment, much to the amazement of the establishment of both political parties. But I think the fight that our main fight is the sense that you can't make a difference. That's what people have been so beat down by the political process, but as you just went through, the economic, the inequality that is built into our society, not just the economy, but into the society generally, that is knocking people down. So we've got to have candidates who are willing to step forward, and we, the people, have got to demand those candidates, and we've got to become those candidates rather than waiting on whoever's next in line to run for office. You run for office. Well, you did it. You stepped out and ran against Ted Cruz. Here's the Washington Post when Beto first stepped forward. Washington Post said that Beto O'Rourke is suffering from a bug causing mass delusions that the old rules of politics no longer apply. Well, they didn't apply.
I still got it.
because you went out there and talked about some real issues, and you talked directly to people. You're famous. You went to all 254 counties, and you didn't just pass through, waving as you passed by, but you sat in the cafes and visited with them. That's the kind of politics that I think that we've got to get back to. And if you talk to people, then they lose their sense of Fox News or whatever they've been watching. They see you as a person, and they say, "Well, yeah, I've got this health problem, and no, I'm not covered. And yes, I am terrified by it. And why don't we have that?" So they begin to think differently. If we just talk to them on the issues themselves and personally, rather than in terms of ideology and party, then I think we make great strides.
I agree. I got to tell you this one quick story. We were doing one of these phone banks, and I participate in every single one of them, do 2.5 hours of calls, try to get between 120, 130 calls in. And so one of my calls, the woman answers, and I say, "Hi, my name is Beto O'Rourke, and I'm calling to see if we can count on you to vote for Joe Biden in this November's election." And we ask that question as an identifier. If the person says yes, then we share that with the Democratic Party and every Democratic candidate, because they're likely to vote for the Democratic State House Rep, the Democratic County Commissioner, et cetera. She said, "Beto, let me stop you before you go any further. This is a Republican household. We will not be voting for Joe Biden, but we appreciate the phone call." And then she said, "Is this really Beto O'Rourke?" And I said, "It is." And she said, "Well, as long as I've got you on the phone, let me ask you some questions about Joe Biden." She said, "Well, is he too old to be doing this?" And I said, "No, I don't think he's too old. Here's my experience with him. Who's he going to pick for his running mate?" "Well, I don't know, but he's committed to picking a woman, and I think that's the right choice." And then she said, "Look, I'm going to let you in on something since you personally called me. I had made up my mind to vote for Trump again, but when I saw him choose to hold an indoor rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth originally, he, of course, moved it to the next day. Somehow that it wasn't the kids in cages. It wasn't the effort to steal Obamacare. It wasn't the mishandling of the pandemic. It was that moment. Maybe that was the straw that finally broke that voter's back." And she said, I'm open to voting for Biden, but I got to think this through. And to your point, Jim, when you listen to people and talk to them directly, and you don't just shoot an ad their way or mail them a slick mailer, anything is possible. And who knows who she'll vote for, but it is possible that she will not be voting for Trump this next time.
And the important thing is to stand for something, or as John Mellencamp sings, you will fall for anything. So,
that's right.
So you got to stand up. Deanna, we got anybody else want to share some thoughts with us?
Yeah, lots of great stuff. And I've been told by a little birdie that we have been given an extra 20 minutes. So we can hang out for a few minutes. We don't have to rush through until unless you guys are sick of each other. Whatever. You tell me. But Krishna is asking, how do we tackle the fake news problem during this election cycle and the daily brainwashing? I mean, I think that really speaks to a lot of, the voter efforts that were, it's great to get out the vote, but like, how do we make sure that people are getting the right information? So y'all's thoughts on that would be great.
Well, I can lead on that. This is one way to do it. you get people like Beto on the screen and on the air talking directly to people, and then you have organizations like People Power to go door to door and to actually become the communicators. We don't have to have the intermediaries, either Fox News or even MSNBC, be the intermediaries. We can be the communicators ourselves. We've had this fight throughout our history. That's what the pamphleteers were in the 1700s. They put a message out. Patrick Henry, not Patrick Henry, but Thomas Paine was out there spreading the word, and you've got to do it directly sometimes and do it constantly. What do you say, Beto?
I agree with you, and I'll put in a shameless plug for the Hightower Lowdown, which
my goodness, wonderful publication. I've read it myself.
It really is, and I'll tell you what, like many Democrats, I'll make some assumptions. I'm reading the El Paso Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and then on social media, I probably have a self-reinforcing circle of people who come to the same conclusions that I do. Reading you, Jim, you'll bring up some issues that I haven't thought of in that way. And like any two people, I may not always agree with you. You may not always agree with me, but you will force me to think about something differently than I had before. And you will often make me laugh while I'm doing that. And so that's something I've really enjoyed. But I do think it does come down to what you just said. I think there's nothing that beats the human to human, eyeball to connection that we make when we're talking to our family or our friends or knocking on doors. It has become much harder during this pandemic, but this live stream is a way to compensate. It's not the real thing, but it's about as close as we get right now. So I think more of this, just talking to each other, unfiltered, unguarded, real, honest, raw. Let's have more of that in our lives. And
more direct meetings, which we can't do now, I understand. But the old populist movement that you mentioned, that did begin out of Texas and spread all across the country. They had a system they called lecturers, and they had 40,000 members of it. So on any given night, 40,000 people would go out and hold a meeting and would talk about what the issue of the day was. And that's an enormous organizing tool, and we need to get back to that. It's a form of speakers bureaus, basically, and you don't have to wait on that happening nationally. You can do that in your own community, certainly your own town, and build that. Just go talk to people and bring them in around non-ideological positions, and the ideology will sort out. But the main ideology is the ideology of that too few people control too much of the money and power today. And they're using that money and power against the rest of us. And that's the fight that we're in. Deanna, what else do we have? Somebody talking to us?
Oh my gosh, so many people talking that it's hard for me to keep up with everyone, which I love. That makes me so happy. I'm an easily excitable nerd, so this is my job. No snarfing beer. So a couple of questions that came in. One from Debbie. This is just an aside, and I think really all of us want to know is, how did Biden like Whataburger in Texas? Does anyone know if he enjoyed his Whataburger visit? Because I'm a big Whataburger fan, so I want to know.
Yeah. So here's one thing I really love about Joe Biden. Yes, he ate his Whataburger, and he got a shake, and he drank and spooned the shake. But you can tell, and this is to Jim's point earlier, he truly loves people and loves being with people. And he wanted to hug and shake hands with every single person who was in there. And you could tell it was not something he felt like he had to do. It was not a performance. He just genuinely wants to know what the hell your story is, where you came from, and why you're here right now. And he's fascinated by people. So I loved being in that Whataburger with him and loved seeing him take the time to be with people. And, there's something beyond the policy is so important that we get right going forward. And that if Biden is elected or when he's elected president, that the work only then begins to hold him accountable in implementing the most progressive agenda of our lifetimes. This is truly an FDR administration moment in terms of the scope and of the challenges we face and then the opportunities that those challenges create. But he also has this capacity for empathy and kindness and connection that is truly rare and I think so important at a time that so many are suffering. And, we all, I don't remember, but we've read about FDR's fireside chats and his ability to connect with a country. And Jim, I've read in my history books that he was the bridge from populism to progressivism. And he was able to touch the real pain and hurt and anger that people felt and channel that into some really amazing achievements for this country that we are still celebrating, Social Security as an example. I just hope that we together, Joe Biden cannot do this on his own. We together as a country can help him be successful in that mold. So that was a very long off-topic answer. Yes,
no, that's okay. No, but the actual question that comes along with that is what about voter ID laws, specifically in Texas?
Well, before we get to that, let me pick up because I think that's important. The divergence into Franklin Roosevelt, and because Roosevelt didn't do the New Deal. People from the outside created the New Deal, and he was willing to adopt it because he was forced to. And he actually came out and said that. A group came in and met with him at the start of his administration and say, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And he said, I agree with you. Now make me do it.
Yes.
And that's our role. Joe Biden is not my favorite candidate in the world, but nonetheless, he's going to be there. And I don't care if it's a sack of concrete. We're going to try to carry him to victory.
That's right.
in November. But we've then got to make something out of him. And he seems loosely open to that. And that's the important thing. We have to force that ourselves. That's the importance of the people movement. Deanna, who's next?
We've got a bunch of people just piling in from all over the country, and it's so heartening. One thing I want to tell you both, too, there's people saying things like, I needed this conversation. I needed to hear this right now. I needed to feel this energy for what's happening. One of the other questions was about voter IDs. Get serious again for a moment. Voter IDs in Texas, and maybe this also kind of veers into mail-in voting. Like, what are we feeling about how that's going to work out in Texas and nationwide?
It's a mess right now. we've got a governor and an attorney general and a lieutenant governor. Just what I call a cacistocracy. That's an actual word. You can look it up. Cacistocracy is government by the very worst people in society, and that's what I think we have right now. And they're actually saying that no, you should be willing to risk your life to go to the polls. After all, you go to the grocery store, you go to the doctor. Well, you have to go to those places. You don't have to go vote, And anybody over 65 in Texas can have a mail-in ballot. And so, if they're worried about fraud, what about fraud on people who are 65 or older? Are they the only ones who do not commit fraud in our society? It works. 65 and older shows that the system works. That they're just trying to keep people from voting again is what it really is.
It is so obvious and transparent in terms of the motivation for making people choose between their health and potentially their lives or the lives of their loved ones.
Yeah.
Their ability to elect the leaders who will represent them in office. And as you and I were discussing earlier, it fits into a very long line of voter suppression tactics in the state of Texas, really ever since the end of Reconstruction right up through today. And so because Democrats are not in power, we cannot change these circumstances, though none of us has immunity to COVID-19, which I would argue is a physical condition under state law that should prevent me from going to the polling place in person and make me eligible for a ballot by mail. We've got to play with the rules as laid out, and that means we've got to bring more voters in through voter registration, and then make sure that when people go to the polls, I was talking to a friend today, they said, bring your own pen so that when you have to sign the registrar's book, when you go to vote, you sign with your own pen. They said you could bring a Q-tip so you could touch the screen with something that hasn't been held by anyone before. Please wear a mask. And here's something I didn't understand. Local municipalities, I knew that they couldn't require masks because the governor has forbade that, but they're not even requiring masks inside of the polling locations. And some of these polling locations are at senior centers where you have vulnerable populations who could be exposed to COVID-19 brought in by voters. So this is really a mess. And I hate to say that there's not a whole bunch that we can do to change the rules or the setup. And we've all tried mightily in the courts. But our answer to this has to be voting in great numbers and voting safely. Please wear a mask when you go to the polls.
Absolutely.
Deanna.
Hi, I'm back again with more questions, and we're running a little bit low on time. We've got about 8 minutes until the powers that be say that we can no longer hang out. So a couple of questions. One from Miles, who's asking about how we really engage youth voters this election cycle, and I think that's something that you have been really active in Hightower. I know with our work, and we talk about a lot in the work about that if you speak to people's values, they actually do turn out and show up. And when you're not speaking this kind of rhetoric stuff. So I'm wondering if you could both speak to a little bit about turning out young folks and the youth vote this year.
I'll start, and I'll tell you, there was a moment in our Senate campaign where I really was hot to go to high schools and colleges and speak to young people. And our campaign team said, you know what, that's a nice gesture, but young people don't vote. And we have limited resources in this campaign. We have 254 counties to cover. We're going up against Ted Cruz, a Democrat, was last elected to Senate in 1988. Let's not mess with young people. But I persisted, and we ended up visiting almost every college campus and a number of high school campuses. And what I learned was, young people essentially were saying to us, look, you wouldn't vote either if no one bothered to take the time to show up and listen to you and include you in the conversation and speak to your aspirations and your concerns and your dreams for yourself and for this country. So hell yes, we'll vote, but show up and pay us some respect in the first place. Young voter turnout was up 500% in 2018 from the last midterm election during early voting. And as Jim would tell us, it wasn't the candidate, it was the people. It was the young leaders on these campuses who organized relentlessly. Prairie View A&M, one of our great historically black colleges, Waller County has sought to keep those black students from voting. They've divided the campus into 2 precincts. They removed the early voting polling location. So one intrepid Prairie View A&M student led a 6-mile march of her fellow students. Hundreds of them joined her to a polling location that was located 6 miles away. Many of them don't have cars on campus. Transportation isn't easy. So they marched to the polls. That shows me that we don't have to tell people, young people, that it's important to vote. We don't have to inspire them. Hey, they're already there. In fact, they're leading on every major issue: climate change, healthcare, criminal justice, you name it. Young people are in the vanguard. We just have to either get out of their way or follow their lead. But we do have to show up. And I think that's one of the messages I've always taken from Jim's work is you show up everywhere. You don't count anybody out, and you don't take anybody for granted. And that especially includes young people.
And the only thing I would ditto to all that, but the only thing I would add is that young people are on the move. They're doing it themselves.
That's
And
right.
so we need to empower them. We don't have to have them come into our organizations. We need to be going to them and say, what do you need from us?
That's right.
How can we help you? And they'll take it from there and make the big difference.
Absolutely. We've got one more question that came in via Jay, who has been also monitoring our comments, our publisher from the Hightower Lowdown, Jay Harris. In 2019, Beto said that it's not enough to be not racist, we must be anti-racist. And we're seeing a lot of talk about that now. What does it mean to be actively anti-racist, and what does being anti-racist mean to each of you? You know, I figured I'd save the easy softball question for the end. Yeah, but anyway, tell us a little bit about what it means to be a white man in politics, being anti-racist right now, and how we're gonna activate. I think that really ties into the youth question and what we're seeing the youth leadership really happening. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would say, one, it means ceding power. That those of us who are white, and in my case old, that we have to say, okay, we're going to listen to you. You are the leader, and so again, tell us what it is we should be doing, and we'll follow your lead. And they are leading; they're not hesitating to do that. Black, Latin American leaders, Latino generally, women. I mean, the country is on the move. I think it's in Houston, Texas. I think they've got like 160 languages are in the public schools there now. I mean, this is not three ethnic groups. This is a diversity that is what democracy really is supposed to be all about. So it's on the move. Again, I grew up. I went all the way through high school in segregated schools. And my parents were not overtly racist, but they were not leading any civil rights movements. I can tell you that. They just went along. So we can't just go along. And people are no longer going along. We have to recognize this reality and to build a new politics is building around this. It's happening whether we want it to or not. And it is, I think, a very, very positive development, because out of that kind of chaos will come a lot of creativity that's going to be wonderful for America.
Yeah, I agree with what Jim just said, and echo the sentiment that it's not enough to go along or not say hateful or racist things, or to only say what we think are the right thing. It's more important to understand that the racism experienced by Black Americans is baked into America from our founding 400 years ago, the first time an enslaved person kidnapped and brought here against their will, to build the wealth that neither they nor their descendants 400 years later are able to fully enjoy and partake. In Texas, we know that a child in kindergarten, so she's 5 years old, is 4 or 5 times likely to be disciplined, expelled, suspended if she's Black than if she's white. We know that we're at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis in the state, exacerbated by the closing of reproductive health care access, but it is 3 times as bad for Black women in the state as it is for white women. We know the history of redlining. Jim mentioned segregated education, which in some ways is more segregated today in 2020 when in terms of access to resources and technology, the ability to afford college and higher education, the squandering of our opportunity to organize labor and have that protection through unions. All of that disproportionately hurts and affects Black Texans, Black Americans. And so when we understand it's systemic, that it's foundational, that it's fundamental to American life, then you have to be very intentional about dismantling this racism and creating opportunity where it has not existed in the past. I think one thing, and there's not only one thing we can do, but one thing to at least begin with is to proceed with reparations and to begin to have the some would call it a truth and reconciliation conversation in this country, where after we won World War II, we made sure that everyday Germans had to visit those concentration camps and understand what was done in their name to benefit some Germans at the expense of others. In South Africa, after apartheid, the same. In Rwanda, after the genocide, a very similar effort. Something like that needs to happen in this country. So that's what I mean when I say you've got to be anti-racist. You got to be all in and dismantle this racist structure.
I just we're at time here, and so I just want to say that was Storm Boyd who called out that question, and I didn't get their name before, so yay, thank you, Storm. And also, I'll just say before I drop out again and let y'all wrap up, as a person who attended those German schools and had to go to those concentration camps, I can tell you it was very, very powerful, the reconciliation education that I received there. So.
Wow.
Yeah. All right. Let's let y'all wrap up. And Beto, I know we all have, and actually, Hightower, after this, you have another event. You're going to be hanging out with Royce West. Yes.
Yes. We're running for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Texas. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I just, and running is, I would just say, be involved in politics. And that's why I wanted Beto to be on here. This is a guy who came up through the classic way of running for office. He started a punk rock band. He had a campaign, a computer hacking organization that he ran. He had a DWI when he was younger. He did all the right steps. So don't, none of that matters. What matters is what you actually stand for. And if you stand for something, and whether you're running for the drainage commissioner, which our revolution has a guy running for drainage commissioner down in Fort Bend County. Yes, indeed, because drainage is kind of important down there, or you're running for the U.S. Senate. Just believe in something and stand for something, and if you do, not only will people maybe rally around you, but you might inspire them to run for something as well. Beto, I thank you for being with us. Have the last word with us.
Well, thank you. You are one of my all-time heroes, and you really do politics the right way. You make it fun. You make it about people. You stand for something. It's never unclear how you feel about something. I've never had to wonder what is really about this issue. And I think that is so powerful and so lacking in our sanitized, safe politics.
There you go.
Consultant-driven and poll-led. And so that's been the funnest part about being in public life, is going everywhere, listening to everybody, and making sure that we're connecting on a human-to-human level. And you've always exemplified that. And I hope to be able to follow your lead in that, and also to encourage, as you just did, anyone who has the slightest interest in standing for public office or getting involved in the political process. There is nothing but nothing that should hold you back. Get out there. We need more people running, and if I can help in any way, would love to be there. So thank you for having me on.
Okay.
I look forward to continuing to follow you.
Well, you're not following me. We're going to work together. And we'll be back with all of y'all with another Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour in just 2 weeks' time.
2 weeks'
Thank
time.
You, Beto.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
See y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Adios.
Bye-bye.